Canada has lost a respected political figure. Hugh Segal passed away at the age of 72. Segal's multifaceted political career included positions as a senator, as well as chief of staff to former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney and Ontario Premier Bill Davis. An author, an academic, the list of achievements goes on. And he's being remembered today for his public service and his commitment to his country.
If you see an issue where the public interest is apparent, and you do your best to advance it, standing down and avoiding being counted or avoiding the fight, I think, is more likely to destroy one's soul than actually standing up and doing what you need to do.
Hugh Segal in his own words. Joining me now from Toronto is longtime friend and former business partner of Hugh Segal, Bill Fox, and Hugh Segal, two of the four founders of one of Ottawa's premier government relations firms, Earnscliffe Strategy Group. I appreciate your coming into studio, Bill, on what I know is a sad day for so many people.
Well, that's exactly right, Heather. I know you appreciate that it is a very sad day for all of us who had the good fortune to be part of the orbit that was around the planet that was Hugh Segal.
You summed it up so beautifully. I'd like to begin by sharing your social media post so everyone can see it. You wrote, Hugh Segal lived a life of purpose, built on a foundation of principles, advanced with passion, and leavened with infectious good humor. And it struck me, Bill, that gives us a very good framework for our conversation today about your friend. Let's begin with this. What was his purpose?
Well, Hugh, one of the things that separated Hugh from some of the more recent expressions of conservative thought was that Hugh saw a role for government. And that role was very precisely to create hope. And to generate that hope for people, Hugh actively pursued the public policies and the programs that would cause each of us to believe that it was possible for us to improve our circumstance, however we defined that circumstance, whatever our particular interest and or need was. And he understood that to do that, you might have to fight for that kind of change.
So it sounds like you were kind of combining a little bit of two of them. So that was the mission and some of the guiding principles you alluded to there. But what sort of shaped how he approached his purpose?
Well, so to come to the principle, I mean, Huey just didn't he actually walked the talk. Huey just didn't believe in institutions. He absolutely engaged in any and all discussions about how to make them better. He didn't just believe in things such as the presumption of innocence, the rule of law. In a very courageous way, he stood as one to defend those principles in the Senate of Canada. And so like he was just a person to be admired on so many levels.
When you refer to the Senate of Canada, I think you've spoken about, you're talking about 2013 in that particular case? In the allegations over expenses that involved his then Senate colleagues, Wall and Brezo and Duffy, and he stood to defend them on the very principles you outlined there.
And he engaged at a time when few would. It's not that there weren't others that shared his view, but they didn't have the courage of their conviction to stand up and publicly defend not necessarily the actions, but the principles. And that was Huey.
I love how you call him Huey. People have written about him. It just seems so endearing, which we'll get to because that's the last part of your social media post. Talk about his passion, how he approached things.
Well, people, again, he was often described as the happy warrior. Huey was happy. Because by extension, if you're about hope, you're about positive. You're about you're about thinking that things are going to get better. But the second part of it sometimes get overlooked. Huey was a warrior. He was a partisan. Make no mistake about that. But he engaged on a fundamentally different level, and in a fundamentally different point of entry. So for Huey, there could be difference. There could even be a sharp difference. But for Hugh Segal, that was where the conversation started, not where it ended. And that the work was to try and take it further for our collective benefit.
And the last part, I would want to make sure I don't ignore the infectious good humor. So many have recalled his twinkle and his laugh. Share some of, if you would, where you joined in the fun.
Well, you know, the reason it was at once infectious and on occasion mischievous.
Oh, share that. That sounds good.
And one of the many examples is that Hugh often referred to his appointment to the Senate of Canada as, quote, the taskless thanks. But in fact, he conducted himself as literally the personification of what the Fathers of Confederation had in mind when they created the Senate, a chamber of sober second thought. He worked hard. He was a very effective communicator, but he understood that that good communication was predicated on ideas, on principles, on policies, on programs, and he was able to articulate and advance those programs because of an exceptional depth of knowledge and understanding of public policy, and an even more exceptional breadth of understanding of public policy. So he's very well known, for example, for his work around the whole notion of a universal basic income. Mm-hmm. But he was equally expert in areas of related to national defense, in areas related to foreign policy, in areas related to international trade, and in fact chaired the Senate committees on several of those things.
And in fact was writing about those very issues strongly just a matter of months ago, so all the way through to the end of his life. I mentioned your longtime friendship. I mentioned that you had a business interest together. He worked in the office of former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, as you did, as press secretary and director of communications. He was toward the end of the Mulroney era, the chief of staff. So you have that bond as well. And I noticed there were tributes from the former prime minister. There are tributes from the current prime minister, a liberal prime minister. Really, the tributes have come from right across the political spectrum today. And that's kind of gives us pause. It's a unifying moment, I suppose, in a certain respect. Can you ponder whether we should be thinking about what your friend could help us do in bridging the political divide?
Well, he absolutely set a path for all of us that we could follow. We know for a fact that in Canada today, one of the biggest issues in politics and public policy is the number of people who feel that they don't have much hope. And so Hugh's model would serve us all well. The second is Hugh understood that to get things done, there has to be collaboration and cooperation, that you have to work with others to achieve ends. And probably the best example of that in his life was as an advisor to former Premier William Davis. He was very active in the whole constitutional patriation discussion, negotiation that involved, you know, seeking compromise and consensus among a number of governments across the country. And that's what he brought to the table. The third thing was he absolutely understood that to get anything done, anything at all, the institutions have to work. And so he always committed part of his life to making sure that the institutions were operating as effectively and as efficiently as they could, and always had an idea about how to make them better.
Bill Fox, it's a pleasure to have spent this time with you, and thank you for paying such lovely tribute tonight.
Well, if I could leave you one final thought.
Sure.
Hughie, every telephone conversation you had with Hughie, at some point in it, he would say, "It's great to hear your voice." And the fact that I won't hear his voice anymore makes me so sad.
It's devastating to so many. That is clear today. Well, you have been a beautiful voice in his honor. So thank you again, Bill Fox.
Thank you.